My name is Gwen, 34 years old, and a senior forensic accountant living in New York City. My entire family flew to a luxury villa in Italy for my brother's extravagant wedding. I stayed in my Manhattan apartment because I was explicitly banned from attending. At exactly 3 in the morning, my phone erupted on my nightstand. I had 47 missed calls. When I finally accepted the FaceTime request, my screen filled with the harsh glare of flashing blue police lights. My mother was screaming hysterically that my brother was in handcuffs. They expected me to fix his mess like I always did. But this time, I refused. The actions I took that night did not just cancel a multi-million-dollar wedding, they destroyed 20 years of carefully crafted family lies. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stop funding the illusion of a perfect family and chose your own peace instead. The cold hardwood floor chilled my bare feet as I sat up in bed. The screen of my phone illuminated the dark room, displaying the panicked face of my 60-year-old mother, Brenda. Behind her, the stunning architecture of a Lake Como rental villa was washed in the alternating red and blue strobe lights of Italian police cruisers. Two officers in dark uniforms were standing on the marble patio, holding my 32-year-old brother, Connor, against a stone pillar. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. He was wearing a custom tuxedo, and his face was pale with absolute terror. "Gwen, pick up the phone and do something," my mother shrieked through the speaker, her voice echoing off the villa walls. "You need to wire $150,000 to the hotel concierge account right this second. They are trying to take your brother away." I stared at the screen, my mind instantly shifting to the analytical precision required by my job. I investigate corporate financial fraud for a living. I read lies hidden inside balance sheets and trace missing funds across international borders. So when my mother demanded a 6-figure wire transfer at 3 in the morning for a brother who had not held a steady job in 3 years, I did not panic. I simply asked her what Connor had done this time. My mother pushed her face close to the camera. "What did he do?" "He did nothing," she yelled, her tone dripping with the venom she always reserved just for me. "This is all your fault, Gwen. Your brother's credit cards were declined at the rehearsal dinner. The hotel manager panicked and called the authorities because the final payment for the entire wedding week bounced. You are a cold and vindictive person. I know you are furious that Connor did not invite you, but freezing his accounts to ruin his big day is sick. You are going to let him go to a foreign prison just because you are jealous." I took a slow breath, letting her accusations wash over me. Connor was the golden child. He was the handsome son who could do no wrong despite a documented history of gambling debts. I was the scapegoat the boring accountant expected to quietly sweep up his messes and absorb the financial blows. But I had absolutely no access to his personal bank accounts, nor did I have the authority to freeze his credit cards. "Mom, I am not in charge of his money," I replied, keeping my voice dangerously level. "I have not spoken to him in 6 months. How could I possibly freeze his accounts from across the ocean?" "Do not play stupid with me," she snapped, turning her phone slightly so I could see Connor violently struggling. "He told us exactly what you did. He said you got angry about the guest list and used your forensic accounting software to lock him out of his corporate funds. You are trying to humiliate him in front of his new family. Nia and her parents are upstairs terrified. You know they are a prominent family from Atlanta. If they find out Connor cannot pay for this wedding, it will be a disaster." The pieces began falling into place. Connor was marrying into wealth. Nia was beautiful, sophisticated, and completely unaware of my brother's actual financial reality. Connor had obviously spun a massive web of lies to secure this marriage, and that web was rapidly unraveling on the shores of Lake Como. I stood up and walked toward my home office carrying the phone. "I am starting my computer," I said. "Just transfer the money, Gwen," my mother cried out. "Be a good sister and save him." I placed the phone on its stand, ignoring my mother's frantic pleas, and woke up my dual monitors. The glow of the screens cast a harsh light across my home office. I bypassed my personal checking account and logged directly into my comprehensive credit monitoring dashboard. As a senior forensic accountant, I have maximum security alerts placed on my social security number by default. The dashboard immediately flashed a critical warning. A massive red banner spanned the top of the screen, indicating a severe security breach. Someone had bypassed my secondary authentication. I clicked the alert, my eyes scanning the data with practiced efficiency. There were no tears, no emotional breakdowns, just the cold, hard reality of numbers. A staggering unsecured personal loan of $150,000 had been finalized exactly 48 hours ago. The funds had been funneled into a newly created joint checking account, bearing both my name and my brother Connor's name. The digital footprint was remarkably sloppy. Connor had used my social security number, my previous billing address from 3 years ago, and a fabricated employment verification document to secure the capital from a predatory online lender. He had then attempted to wire the entire sum in staggered payments to various international accounts. The recipients were an elite catering company in Milan, a luxury boat rental service on Lake Como, and a premium floral designer. But Connor had made a fatal miscalculation. He triggered my automated fraud protection. My banking institution detected the sudden influx of credit and the immediate attempts to wire massive sums overseas. The fraud algorithm instantly locked down the joint account and reversed the outgoing wire transfers. Every single check Connor wrote to the Italian vendors had bounced. That was why the hotel manager called the police. Connor was trying to fund a royal wedding with stolen identity money, and the vault had slammed shut. I leaned toward the phone, staring directly into the camera lens. "Mom," I said, my voice cutting through her continued sobbing. Connor did not get locked out of his corporate funds. He stole my social security number and took out a fraudulent loan in my name. He committed a federal crime. I did not freeze his accounts out of jealousy. The bank froze them because he is a thief and an identity fraudster. The line went dead silent for a brief moment. Even the police sirens in the background seemed to fade. I expected shock. I expected horror. I expected my mother to turn around and demand an explanation from the son she had coddled his entire life. Instead, her face hardened into a mask of pure indignation. "So what?" she barked, waving her hand dismissively, as if I had just accused him of borrowing a sweater without asking. "It is just a loan, Gwen. He was going to pay you back after the honeymoon. Family helps family. You have excellent credit and you make a fortune at that firm. He just needed to borrow your good name for a few days to get the vendor payments cleared. How can you be so selfish at a time like this?" I sat back in my chair, genuinely astounded by her delusion. "Borrow my good name," I repeated, shaking my head. "Mom, this is a felony. He forged my signature and stole my identity. The Italian authorities are not arresting him because of a bank error. They are arresting him because he just tried to defraud multiple local businesses using illegitimate funds. If I validate this loan, I am legally on the hook for $150,000. "Do not use those intimidating legal words with me," she yelled, her face turning bright red. "You always do this. You always try to make yourself sound so smart and make your brother look bad. He is your blood. He is marrying a woman from a very powerful African-American family. Nia's father is a respected business mogul. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for us? You need to call your bank right now, tell them it was a misunderstanding, and release those funds. If you do not fix this, the wedding is completely ruined, and it will be entirely your fault." The sheer audacity of her demand left a bitter taste in my mouth. She was not asking for a favor. She was ordering me to become an accessory to a major financial crime just to protect the fragile ego of her golden child. Connor had gambled with my financial future to buy himself a billionaire persona, and my mother was entirely willing to sacrifice me on the altar of his vanity. I firmly refused to let them completely destroy my entire life simply to fund their toxic and twisted illusion. Suddenly, the camera jerked violently as the phone was snatched from my mother's hands. My 62-year-old father, Richard, filled the screen. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes darted nervously toward the Italian officers who were now speaking rapidly into their radios. Unlike my mother, who relied on hysterics to get her way, my father employed a different tactic. He used condescension and aggressive authority, always expecting me to fall into line. "Gwen, enough of this absolute nonsense," he barked, his voice dropping into a harsh whisper so the people upstairs would not hear him. "Stop being so dramatic. You make too much money anyway sitting in that fancy office of yours. You have a massive savings account and you barely spend a dime. Unfreeze the cards, authorize the bank transfer, and let your brother enjoy his wedding. We can sort out the paperwork details when we get back to the States." The sheer entitlement radiating from him was suffocating. He was not asking me to lend them money. He was commanding me to accept liability for a massive federal crime, as if he were simply asking me to pick up the tab for dinner. "Dad, there are no paperwork details to sort out," I replied, pressing my fingertips against my temples to fend off a looming headache. "Connor stole my identity. The bank flagged it as severe financial fraud. Even if I wanted to throw away $150,000, which I absolutely do not, I cannot just call the fraud department and tell them I changed my mind about a felony." My father scowled, leaning closer to the phone until his face was distorted by the lens. "You need to fix this right now to save face," he hissed, his face turning purple with rage. "Do you have any idea who is sleeping in the master suite upstairs?" Nia comes from a very wealthy, elite African-American family in Atlanta. Her father, Thomas, owns the largest chain of luxury car dealerships in the entire South. They flew here on a private jet, Gwen. A private jet. If Thomas finds out Connor is broke and getting arrested for bouncing checks, this wedding is over. We will be the laughingstock of their entire social circle. You are going to ruin your brother's one chance at securing his future with a good family." His words ignited a fire of pure resentment deep inside my chest. He was perfectly willing to let me go bankrupt and face potential legal ruin just to maintain a fake billionaire facade for a family they barely knew. He wanted me to buy Connor a golden ticket into high society. "Secure his future," I repeated, my voice rising with a cold, sharp edge that made him flinch. "You mean like how I secured his future 10 years ago? Have you completely forgotten that you and Mom cornered me in my college dorm room and begged me to drain my entire academic savings account to pay for his high-end gambling rehab facility? You swore to me it was a matter of life and death. You promised me you would pay me back every single cent, but you never did." He tried to interrupt, but I cut him off, the years of suppressed anger finally pouring out. "Instead of paying me back for saving his life, you turned around 6 months later and bought Connor a brand new Tesla because you claimed he needed a reliable car to get to his entry-level job, a job he was fired from 3 weeks later. I had to work 3 separate jobs on campus just to afford my accounting textbooks and finish my degree while Connor was driving a luxury electric vehicle funded by your endless enabling. That was entirely different." My father sputtered, his eyes darting frantically around the Italian courtyard as the officers began pushing Connor toward the back of their patrol vehicle. He was young and he made a mistake. "We are a family, and family members make sacrifices for each other." "No, Dad," I corrected him, staring dead into his panicked eyes. "I make sacrifices. You and Mom make excuses. And Connor makes catastrophic messes that you expect me to clean up. But the dynamic ends tonight. I am not taking the fall for this." "You listen to me right now, you ungrateful little brat," he snarled, dropping all pretense of being a reasonable parent. "If you do not call that bank, authorize the immediate release of those frozen funds, and tell the Italian police this was all your mistake, you will never be part of this family again. We will cut you off completely and never speak to you. I will personally make sure everyone everywhere understands what you did." I stared at the screen, letting his hollow threats wash over me. While my father continued to shout insults and promise my absolute destruction, my fingers flew across my mechanical keyboard. As a forensic accountant, I knew that an unsecured personal loan of $150,000 for someone with Connor's abysmal credit history was mathematically impossible. No legitimate financial institution would hand him that kind of cash based solely on my stolen social security number without demanding substantial collateral. Something else was buried in the data, and I was going to find it. I bypassed the initial fraud alert dashboard and initiated a deep dive, comprehensive background sweep on both of our names, pulling real-time property records, court filings, and secondary credit bureaus. The system took a few seconds to aggregate the data. When the progress bar finally hit 100%, a new, far more terrifying alert flashed on my right monitor. It was a lien notification. My blood ran completely cold as I clicked on the attached PDF file. It was a copy of the loan origination document from the predatory lender. I scanned past the forged signatures and the fake employment verification, my eyes locking onto the section labeled Collateral and Secured Assets. Connor had not just taken out a standard unsecured loan, he had secured the massive debt against a piece of real estate. Specifically, he had leveraged the sprawling 4-bedroom colonial house in New Jersey, where my parents currently lived. He had submitted a fraudulent power of attorney document claiming he had the legal right to act as the primary homeowner to authorize a second mortgage. I leaned closer to the microphone, cutting off my father mid-sentence. "Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "How exactly did Connor secure this loan? Did he tell you?" My father scoffed, dismissing my question with a wave of his hand. "Who cares about the technicalities, Gwen? He used his business connections. He is an entrepreneur. Now stop stalling and release the funds." "He did not use business connections," I replied, maximizing the forged document on my screen. "He used your house. He took out a second mortgage on the New Jersey property to pay for this wedding. He forged a power of attorney and put a lien on the house." For a second, absolute silence fell over the FaceTime call. Even my mother stopped her dramatic sobbing. My father's face contorted in a mixture of confusion and sudden panic. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice trembling slightly. "He cannot put a lien on our house. The mortgage is completely paid off. We own it free and clear. He does not have the deed." And that was the moment the final devastating piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The ultimate secret my parents had buried to protect their pride. "No, Dad," I said slowly, savoring the bitter irony of the situation. "You do not own that house free and clear. You do not own it at all. 5 years ago, while Connor was busy pretending to be a crypto millionaire on the internet, my parents had fallen massively behind on their property taxes and mortgage payments. The bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings. To save them from being thrown out onto the street and facing total public humiliation, I stepped in. I quietly bought the house directly from the bank, paying off their entire debt in one lump sum. I became the sole legal owner of the property. I let them continue living there rent-free, agreeing to keep the secret so they could maintain their wealthy facade in the neighborhood. They were supposed to be my tenants, but they quickly and conveniently forgot that I was their actual landlord. Because you do not own the house, I continued watching my father's face drain of all color. I own the house. I bought it from the bank 5 years ago to save you from foreclosure, remember? Which means Connor did not just forge a power of attorney to borrow against your property. He forged a power of attorney to borrow against my property. He committed real estate fraud, title fraud, and identity theft. He literally tried to steal my house to buy a wedding cake and a luxury boat rental. The harsh realization hit my father like a brutal physical blow. He staggered backward, the heavy phone shaking wildly in his trembling hand. The Italian police officers were now aggressively pushing a sobbing Connor into the back of their transport vehicle, loudly slamming the heavy door completely shut. This was no longer just a simple bank error. This was a massive, multi-layered federal felony, and the concrete evidence was sitting right on my hard drive. Before the transport vehicle could pull away, a second patrol car screeched to a halt on the cobblestone driveway. A senior officer, distinguishable by the gold braiding on his uniform, stepped out and signaled his colleagues to hold. The officers holding Connor paused, leaving the heavy door of the transport van slightly ajar. The senior officer approached my brother, holding a clipboard packed with printouts of the declined transactions and the bounced wire transfers. "You are Mr. Connor?" the officer asked in thick, broken English, pointing a stern finger at my brother's chest. "You pay hotel with fake money. You show us real banked paper now, or you go to Milano jail. Grand theft. Very serious crime." Connor was hyperventilating his custom tuxedo, now rumpled and stained with sweat. He desperately twisted his neck, scanning the chaotic courtyard, until his eyes locked onto the glowing screen of the phone clutched in my father's trembling hand. He knew I was still on the line. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Connor lunged against the grip of the officers, thrusting his face as close to the camera lens as physically possible. "Gwen, you have to press the authorization button right now," he screamed, his voice cracking with pure panic. "Tell them it was a system glitch. Tell them the money is real and you are my accountant. Do it right now, or my entire life is over." I stared at his tear-streaked face, completely unmoved by his theatrical display. "Connor," I said coldly, my voice projecting clearly from the phone speaker, "you forged my signature to steal $150,000, and you committed title fraud on my house. The money is not real, and I am not going to lie to the Italian authorities to cover up your federal crimes." The realization that I knew about the house did not trigger a single ounce of remorse in him. Instead, he instantly pivoted to playing the ultimate victim. "Please, Gwen," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "If I go to an Italian prison, I will lose Nia. She is the love of my life. Her family will cancel the wedding, and I will have absolutely nothing. Do you want me to die in a foreign jail cell? Are you really that evil?" "I am not the one who committed identity theft," I reminded him. "You did this to yourself." He ignored reality and doubled down on the emotional blackmail, bringing our parents into his twisted narrative. "If you do not authorize that loan, the bank will investigate the forged deed," he yelled frantically. "They will seize the house in New Jersey. Mom and Dad will be completely homeless, Gwen. They will be out on the street because you were too stubborn to click a button. You are destroying this family. You are making our parents homeless just to punish me." His sheer audacity pushed me to the absolute edge of my patience. He was using the very parents he had just tried to defraud as human shields to escape the consequences of his own actions. My father, still holding the phone, looked completely paralyzed by the revelation that his golden child was willing to sacrifice their only shelter for a luxury wedding. "Mom and Dad will not be homeless because of me," I replied sharply. "I am the legal owner of that house, and I am the only reason they are not already living on the street. If they lose their home, it will be because their perfect son tried to secretly mortgage it to buy a wedding cake and a luxury boat rental." The Italian officers, tired of the screaming match in a language they only partially understood, began to forcefully shove Connor into the back of the van. Connor fought back, his face twisting into a mask of pure rage. "I will ruin you, Gwen!" he roared, his voice echoing across the pristine courtyard. "If I lose Nia, I swear I will destroy your career. I will tell everyone you framed me. I am the victim here. You set me up." The heavy metal door of the transport vehicle finally slammed shut with a deafening thud, immediately cutting off his unhinged and delusional threats to ruin my life. The senior officer turned to my stunned parents, slowly shaking his head in absolute disgust, before firmly demanding to see their passports and travel documents for official processing. My brother had pushed me past the point of no return. He had expected me to fold under the pressure of his victimhood, but he had severely miscalculated. I was no longer the quiet sister who cleaned up his messes. I was the senior financial auditor who had all the concrete receipts, and I was finally ready to expose everything. While I sat there silently preparing to deliver the final devastating blow, my father dropped his hand, letting the phone dangle toward the cobblestone ground. The screen spun dizzily, capturing the chaotic flashes of the red and blue police lights and the polished black shoes of the Italian authorities. I could hear my mother hyperventilating off camera, completely paralyzed by the reality of the situation. Suddenly, a pair of pristine white designer heels stepped into the frame. The phone was snatched up with a swift, aggressive motion. The camera auto-focused, revealing the immaculate and furious face of my future sister-in-law, Nia. She was wearing a custom white silk bridal robe with the word bride embroidered in heavy gold thread across the lapel. Her hair and makeup were flawlessly styled for the extravagant rehearsal dinner she had just been forced to leave. Nia glared into the camera lens with an expression of absolute disgust, her dark eyes flashing with a terrifying sense of elite entitlement. "What exactly is your problem?" Nia demanded, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. "Connor told me you had a history of mental instability and severe jealousy issues, but I never imagined you would pull a stunt like this on our wedding weekend. You are supposed to be an employee of his firm. You are a bitter, low-level bookkeeper who is lucky my fiancé even keeps you on the payroll out of sheer pity. And now you think you can hack into the corporate accounts and freeze his assets just because you are mad you did not get an invitation to Lake Como. You are pathetic." I sat perfectly still in my desk chair, absorbing the sheer magnitude of the delusion radiating from my screen. My brother had not just exaggerated his income to impress a wealthy woman. He had fabricated an entire alternate universe where he was a wildly successful chief executive officer, and I was nothing but his unstable, incompetent subordinate. Nia tossed her perfectly styled hair over her silk-covered shoulder, entirely convinced she was speaking to a jealous peasant. "Listen to me very carefully," she sneered, pointing a perfectly manicured acrylic fingernail directly at the camera lens. "You picked the absolute wrong family to mess with today. My father is Thomas Carter. He owns one of the most powerful corporate empires in Atlanta. We have an entire team of high-powered, ruthless lawyers on retainer who specialize in corporate sabotage and financial interference. If you do not log back into your little accounting software right this second and release Connor's corporate funds, I will personally have my legal team destroy you. We will sue you for everything you are worth. We will take your apartment, your savings, and we will make sure you are blacklisted from ever working in the financial sector again. You will be completely ruined before my honeymoon is even over." Her arrogance was truly breathtaking. She spoke with the unwavering confidence of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. She was completely oblivious that the man she was about to marry was currently sitting in the back of an Italian police van for stealing my identity. "Nia," I said, keeping my tone deadly calm and completely devoid of emotion, "you need to stop threatening me and start paying very close attention to what is actually happening around you. Connor does not own a firm. He does not have corporate funds. You are threatening to sue the only person who actually knows the truth about your fiancé." Nia let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed loudly in the villa courtyard. "Oh, please," she scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Save your pathetic lies for someone who actually cares. Connor warned me you would try to spin some crazy narrative to make yourself look like the victim. He told me you always try to tear him down because you are single, miserable, and stuck in a dead-end job while he is out building an empire. You are just furious because he is successful and marrying into a family of real wealth and status. You cannot stand that he has completely outgrown you." I looked at her beautiful, arrogant face and felt a fleeting moment of genuine pity. She was about to fall from a very high pedestal, and the impact was going to be absolutely devastating. My brother had built his entire romantic relationship on a foundation of stolen money and forged documents. "You really have absolutely no idea who you are marrying, do you?" I asked quietly. Nia sneered, leaning closer to the camera. "I am marrying a self-made millionaire," she fired back. "And you are just a sad, jealous woman who is about to get sued into bankruptcy." I let her words hang in the air for a moment. The sheer scale of Connor's deception was finally coming into sharp focus. He had not simply embellished his resume or exaggerated his crypto investments to win over a wealthy woman. He had stolen my entire life. He had taken my decade of grueling university studies, my brutal licensing exams, and my hard-earned position as a senior forensic accountant, and he had seamlessly grafted them onto his own pathetic existence. He was using my exact career trajectory as his own personal dating profile. It was horrifying. So I replied, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. Connor told you that he owns the forensic accounting firm in Manhattan. Of course he does, Nia snapped, adjusting the collar of her expensive silk robe. He built it from the ground up. He told my father all about how he navigated the corporate tax audits for Fortune 500 companies last year. That is exactly why my father respects him so much. Thomas Carter does not just let any ordinary man marry his daughter. He respects ambition. Connor is a visionary. He even showed us the corporate lease agreement for the financial district office. And he told us how he generously gave you a low-level data entry job because nobody else would hire someone with your mental health struggles. You should be down on your knees thanking him instead of trying to sabotage his rehearsal dinner. I clicked my mouse, bringing up the actual corporate directory of my firm on my second monitor. Connor's name was nowhere on it, obviously, because he had never set foot inside the building. The lease agreement he showed her father was undoubtedly another crude forgery, likely mocked up on the same laptop he used to steal my social security number. The Fortune 500 audits Nia was bragging about were my exact case files from the previous fiscal year. My parents must have fed him the details of my career over Sunday dinners, and he had weaponized my own achievements to construct his fake billionaire persona. He needed this extravagant Italian wedding to maintain the illusion. He needed the vintage champagne, the Lake Como villa, and the custom tuxedo to prove to the Atlanta elite that he was one of them. But because he was completely broke and unemployed, he had to fund his billionaire cosplay with my credit and my real estate. Nia, I said, leaning closer to the microphone. I want you to listen to me very carefully. My name is on the lease of that corporate office, not his. I am the senior auditor who handled those corporate tax accounts. Connor does not own a firm. He does not even have a college degree. He dropped out of his second semester to go to a gambling rehabilitation center which I paid for. Nia rolled her eyes, letting out a heavy, dramatic sigh. This is exactly what he warned us about, she said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. He said you had a severe delusion problem. He said you constantly try to claim credit for his hard work because you cannot handle your own mediocrity. You are actually sick, Gwen. You need professional psychiatric help. Now I am going to give you one last chance to fix your little computer glitch and release his corporate funds. If you do not, I will have my father call the bank president directly. We know people at the very top of the financial food chain. Her blind faith in his lies was staggering. Connor had expertly weaponized the very concept of gaslighting, turning his wealthy fiancé into his most aggressive attack dog. He knew that by painting me as a bitter, mentally unstable sister, Nia and her powerful family would immediately dismiss anything I said as the ravings of a jealous lunatic. It was a masterclass in manipulation. You cannot call the bank president to authorize a stolen identity loan, I stated flatly. The funds you are demanding are the proceeds of a federal crime. If your father is as smart a businessman as you claim, he will know how to read a basic credit report. Tell Connor to show you his actual bank statements. Tell him to log into his supposed corporate accounts right now in front of you and the Italian police. Nia scoffed, her face twisting with pure indignation. I do not need to check his bank accounts. I know exactly who he is. You know a ghost, I shot back, my patience finally evaporating completely. You are marrying a financial predator who is currently in handcuffs because his stolen money ran out. Before Nia could launch another barrage of legal threats, a hand reached into the frame and violently yanked the phone away. The camera whipped around, capturing a blur of stone pillars and panicked faces, before focusing on my father's flushed face. Richard had dragged the phone away from Nia, retreating into a dimly lit hallway to isolate our conversation from the bride and her wealthy family. His breathing was heavy and sweat glistened on his forehead. He looked nervously over his shoulder, ensuring Thomas and Nia were out of earshot, before leaning closely into the microphone. Gwen, you need to listen to me, he whispered urgently, dropping his aggressive tone and replacing it with a sickeningly sweet, pleading voice. You have to play along with this, just for the weekend, just until they say their vows tomorrow and the marriage certificate is signed. You have to let Nia believe you are the unstable employee, and he is the chief executive officer. If you just unlock the accounts and authorize the transfer, this nightmare goes away." I stared at him, wondering if the stress had caused him to lose his grip on reality. "Dad, are you asking me to validate a fraudulent $150,000 loan and pretend to be my brother's mentally ill subordinate so he can con a woman into marriage?" I asked, articulating every word with sharp precision. "Do not use the word con," my father hissed, his eyes darting down the hallway. "It is a strategic exaggeration. He is marrying into the Carter family, Gwen. Do you understand what that means? Thomas owns a billion-dollar automotive empire. Once the wedding is finalized, Thomas is bringing Connor on as a senior vice president of regional sales. He will be making mid-six figures right out of the gate. He will pay you back the money. He will pay off the second mortgage on the house. You will get every penny back with interest. You just have to take the financial hit for 48 hours. The audacity of his proposal left me speechless. My father was not just enabling my brother's criminality anymore. He was actively participating in the conspiracy. He wanted me to become an accessory to federal identity theft and real estate fraud so his golden child could secure a lucrative job from a father-in-law he was deceiving. "There is no paying me back, Dad." I fired back, my voice rising enough to make him flinch. "The money is frozen because the bank flagged it as stolen. If I call them and claim I authorized it, I become legally responsible for the debt. And when Connor gets fired by Thomas for being a fraud, I will be the one facing bankruptcy. Falsely claiming I authorized a fraudulent loan makes me an accessory to wire fraud. I could lose my certified public accountant license. I could go to federal prison. You are demanding I risk my entire career and my freedom just to protect his fake ego. You are being incredibly selfish." My father snarled, his pleading tone instantly vanishing, replaced by bitter resentment. "You already have a great career. You have a beautiful apartment. You have everything you could ever want. Your brother has struggled his entire life to find his footing. This is his one chance to finally be successful. This is his golden ticket, Gwen. Why can you never just support him? Why do you always have to be the difficult one? You have the power to save this family right now, and you are choosing to destroy us over some technicalities." "Technicalities," I repeated, my anger finally boiling over into a quiet, dangerous fury. "Forging my social security number is not a minor technicality. Putting a fraudulent lien on my property is not a technicality. You are perfectly willing to throw me to the wolves to protect him. You would rather see me in federal court than see your son face the consequences of his own actions. You do not care about me at all. I am just a disposable human shield to both of you." My father glared at the screen, his expression hardening into a mask of pure, unapologetic cruelty. "You are my daughter," he said coldly, his voice devoid of any parental warmth. "But Connor is my son. He carries our family name. He needs this more than you need your pride. Now you are going to call your bank, and you are going to tell them you authorized the loan. You are going to apologize to Nia and tell her you are having a severe mental breakdown. If you refuse to do this right now, you are completely dead to me." He delivered the ultimate betrayal with absolutely zero hesitation or remorse. He had firmly made his choice. His devastating words finally freed me to make mine without any lingering feelings of guilt whatsoever. As my father finished delivering his ruthless ultimatum, the camera abruptly jerked sideways. He shoved the phone back into my mother's hands. Brenda's face filled the screen once again, her expression no longer frantic or tearful, but twisted into a mask of cold, calculating malice. She had been listening to the entire exchange, and seeing that my father's aggressive approach had failed to break me, she decided to deploy the ultimate weapon in her manipulative arsenal. She was going to use my reputation against me. "Gwen, you are not going to walk away from us," my mother sneered, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. "You have always been the one to fix things. When Connor crashed his car, you paid the deductible. When your father lost his bonus, You covered the groceries. You are the reliable one. You do not get to suddenly decide you are done playing your part just because the stakes are high. We are your family and you owe us your loyalty. I owe you absolutely nothing, I replied, keeping my voice dangerously steady. You just admitted you expect me to go to federal prison so your son can marry a rich woman based on a lie. That is not family loyalty. That is a hostage situation. My mother let out a sharp, humorless laugh that made my blood run cold. You think you hold all the cards because you have your name on a few pieces of paper, she said, leaning so close to the camera that I could see the furious pulse beating in her neck. But you are forgetting who you are dealing with. If you do not authorize that bank transfer right this second, your father and I will not just disown you. We will completely destroy your reputation. We will call every single aunt, uncle, and cousin in this family before the sun comes up. I crossed my arms, refusing to let her see even a fraction of the disgust churning in my stomach. And what exactly are you going to tell them? I challenged her. Are you going to tell them your golden child is a felon who tried to steal my house? We will tell them you stole the house from us, my mother fired back without missing a single beat. Her ability to instantly rewrite reality was truly terrifying. We will tell them you used your fancy accounting tricks to swindle your own elderly parents out of their property while we were struggling financially. We will say you took advantage of our vulnerability to put the deed in your name, and then you purposely froze Connor's bank accounts on his wedding day out of pure malicious jealousy, because you are a bitter, lonely woman who cannot stand to see her brother happy. She paused, letting the heavy threat sink in her eyes, gleaming with dark triumph. Who do you think they are going to believe, Gwen? She taunted. The sweet parents who just wanted to celebrate their son, or the cold, calculating accountant who refused to even show up to the wedding? We will make sure you are entirely ostracized. You will not be invited to another Thanksgiving, another Christmas, or another family gathering for the rest of your life. You will die completely alone. Her words were designed to strike at the deepest insecurities of my childhood, the desperate need for approval that had kept me tethered to their toxic dynamic for 34 years. They were relying on my historical role as the family fixer, the obedient daughter who would always swallow her pride and open her wallet just to keep the peace and avoid public embarrassment. They genuinely believed that the threat of being outcast would terrify me into submission. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed I still valued a seat at their table. Mom, I said, my voice completely devoid of the panic she so desperately wanted to hear. You are threatening to lock me out of a burning building. Do you really think I want to spend another Thanksgiving sitting across from a family that views me as nothing more than an emergency bank account? You can call every relative we have. You can tell them I am the devil incarnate. I do not care anymore. My mother's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine uncertainty. You are bluffing, she snapped, her voice rising in panic. You cannot handle being cut off from us. Watch me, I replied smoothly. You wanted a villain, Mom. Congratulations, you finally have one. But the difference is, I am a villain with concrete receipts, and my patience has officially expired. I will not be manipulated into funding his criminal behavior any longer, no matter how many baseless threats you scream. Without waiting for another response from her, I reached out and firmly pressed the mute button on the FaceTime interface. The sudden silence in my office was deafening, a stark contrast to the absolute chaos unfolding across the globe in Italy. Through the screen, I could still see my mother screaming, her mouth moving in exaggerated shapes, as she undoubtedly launched into another tirade of threats and emotional manipulation. But her voice was completely gone, effectively shutting out the toxic noise that had dominated my entire life. I did not shed a single tear. My hands were not shaking. For the first time in 34 years, the overwhelming anxiety of disappointing my parents had completely evaporated, replaced by a sharp, calculating focus. I was in my element now. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a forensic accounting investigation, and I was going to dismantle my brother's entire fraudulent empire piece by piece. I turned my attention to the second monitor, opening a secure, encrypted folder on my desktop. I needed to assemble the ultimate legal payload, a bulletproof dossier of undeniable evidence that no amount of gaslighting or parental favoritism could ever dispute. First, I accessed the predatory lender's server portal, using the credentials Connor had foolishly routed through my email address. I extracted the raw IP logs associated with the fraudulent loan application. The data clearly showed the application was submitted from a wireless router located in a luxury hotel in Milan, exactly where Connor and Nia had stayed 3 days ago before moving to Lake Como. It completely obliterated any claim that a random hacker had stolen my identity. The physical location placed my brother directly at the scene of the digital crime. Next, I pulled up the forged DocuSign footprints. Connor had been incredibly sloppy, relying on the automated digital signature software to forge my name on the secondary mortgage documents. However, he did not realize that enterprise-level electronic signature platforms record the unique device identifier of the computer executing the signature. I downloaded the metadata report. It perfectly matched the media access control address of the MacBook Pro my parents had bought for him 2 years ago. The digital trail was not just circumstantial. It was absolute concrete proof that my brother had personally executed the fraudulent documents. Then I navigated to the New Jersey County Clerk's online database. I pulled the official notarized property deed for my parents' house. The document clearly displayed my full legal name as the sole proprietor and exclusive owner of the property. I exported it as a high-resolution PDF, ensuring the county seal and the recording date from 5 years ago were prominently visible. This single document was the silver bullet that would completely destroy my parents' pathetic threat to turn the family against me. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were living in my house, surviving on my charity while actively conspiring to help my brother steal it out from under me. Finally, I ran a hard credit inquiry on Connor's actual social security number to contrast it with the pristine financial profile he had stolen from me. The screen populated with a sea of red flags. Unpaid credit cards, defaulted auto loans, and outstanding collections from various online gambling platforms. His real credit score was a dismal 420. It was the financial profile of an absolute disaster. I took a screenshot of the damning score, placing it right next to the fabricated bank statements he had likely shown his future father-in-law. The contrast was staggering. He was a complete fraud wearing a very expensive borrowed suit. I compiled the IP logs, the digital signature metadata, the verified property deed, and his disastrous credit score into a single comprehensive PDF document. I titled the file with a simple clinical name to ensure it looked like an official corporate audit report. This was the receipt of all receipts. This was the irrefutable truth that would shatter the billionaire CEO illusion forever. I checked the FaceTime window one more time. My father had taken the phone back and was aggressively jabbing his finger at the camera, his face red with fury, completely unaware that his voice was muted and his threats were falling on deaf ears. They thought I was sitting here crying, agonizing over their ultimatums, and desperately trying to find a way to save their golden child. They had no idea I was quietly loading the digital weapon that would end this nightmare for good. I took a deep breath, perfectly satisfied with the meticulously organized dossier on my screen. I was completely ready to drop the final digital bomb that would permanently destroy every single lie they had ever told about me tonight. I kept my finger over the mouse eyes locked on the chaotic scene playing out on my screen. Before I could unmute the microphone to deliver my prepared dossier, the camera angle violently shifted again. My mother had dropped the phone onto a patio table in her panic. The lens pointed upward, capturing the dramatic stone arches of the villa and the tense faces in the courtyard. Suddenly, a towering figure stepped into the frame, instantly commanding the space. It was Thomas Carter Nia's father. He radiated generational wealth and absolute authority in his tailored dinner jacket. He did not look angry, which was somehow far more terrifying. He looked severely disappointed. "What is going on out here?" Thomas demanded, his resonant voice effortlessly cutting through the hysterical sobbing of my mother and the frantic murmurs of the Italian officers. Why is the general manager of this hotel currently standing in the main lobby, threatening to evict my entire family and lock the doors? And more importantly, why are there two police cruisers parked on the lawn of a property I am hosting a wedding at? Nia immediately rushed to her father's side, her previous arrogant demeanor vanishing, replaced by the nervous energy of a little girl seeking protection. "Daddy, it is just a huge misunderstanding," she stammered, wrapping her arms around his rigid elbow. Thomas ignored her, his sharp eyes scanning the courtyard until they landed on Connor. The Italian officers were standing next to my brother, holding his zip-tied hands, waiting for instructions. The humiliation of the moment should have crushed any normal human being. But Connor was not normal. He was a pathological liar who had spent his adult life talking his way out of catastrophic failures. Like a switch being flipped, his panic completely evaporated. He straightened his posture, rolled his shoulders back, and plastered on the charismatic, confident smile he used to con his way into the Carter family. "Thomas, I am so incredibly sorry for this ridiculous interruption," Connor said, his voice dropping into a smooth, reassuring baritone. He spoke as if he were simply discussing a minor shipping delay at a corporate board meeting, completely ignoring the plastic cuffs digging into his wrists. "Please do not worry about the hotel manager. This is nothing but a frustrating corporate banking glitch." "A banking glitch," Thomas repeated slowly, his thick eyebrows knitting together in deep skepticism. "The manager said your transfers bounced. Authorities were called because you attempted to pay with stolen credentials. That does not sound like a simple banking glitch, Connor. That sounds like a financial crime." Connor let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head as if the situation was just a hilarious bureaucratic mix-up. "You know how these international wire transfers are, Thomas," he said smoothly, taking a step closer to his future father-in-law, despite the officers tightening their grip. "Our firm moves millions of dollars across borders every single week. Our fraud protection algorithms are incredibly sensitive. Unfortunately, my sister Gwen, who handles the lower-level data entry and basic bookkeeping for the company, made a catastrophic routing error this evening. She triggered an automated lockdown on our main corporate account. I sat in my apartment in New York, listening to him effortlessly throw me under the bus, with a sickening level of sociopathic charm. He was literally standing in police custody, facing a federal felony for identity theft, and he was still trying to convince a billionaire that he was a highly successful chief executive officer. She is not experienced with international tax law." Connor continued, leaning into the lie with breathtaking audacity. "And to be completely honest, she has been struggling with severe mental health issues lately. She panicked when the accounts froze and failed to notify our liaisons. The Italian banks automatically flag the sudden stop in funds as fraudulent. It is a massive headache, but my legal team back in Manhattan is sorting it out. The funds will be released by morning, and I will ensure the hotel manager is heavily compensated for his distress." Thomas stared at Connor for a long, agonizing moment. The silence in the courtyard was thick and suffocating. You could almost see the gears turning in the older man's head, analyzing the situation, weighing the bizarre explanation against the reality of the flashing police lights. Connor held his gaze without blinking, deploying every ounce of his manipulative charm to keep the illusion alive just a little bit longer. My parents stood silently in the background, breathlessly watching their golden child spin the most dangerous lie of his entire life. They assumed my physical absence meant absolute silence. They had no idea I was listening to every single word with the ultimate legal payload ready to fire. Thomas stood still, his sharp gaze shifting from Connor to the Italian officers, clearly unconvinced by the corporate glitch narrative. Connor knew his future father-in-law was a shark in the business world, a man who could smell a bad investment from a mile away. One wrong word, one slight hesitation, and the billionaire illusion would shatter. But Connor also knew something far more dangerous. He suddenly realized the FaceTime call was still active. His eyes darted past Thomas and locked onto the patio table where my mother had carelessly dropped the phone. The screen was still glowing brightly against the dark stone, illuminating the fact that I had heard every single word of his pathetic lie. Panic finally flickered behind his charming smile. He subtly jerked his head toward the table, making desperate eye contact with our father. Richard instantly understood the assignment. He needed to eliminate the digital witness before I could unmute my microphone and tear the corporate glitch narrative to shreds right in front of Thomas. My father lunged forward with surprising speed for a man his age, stepping directly between Thomas and the patio table. He snatched the phone up his thick fingers, fumbling clumsily across the screen as he desperately tried to find the red button to end the call. In his frantic state, his hands were sweating profusely, and the touchscreen refused to register his tapping. I sat in my office watching his enormous thumb repeatedly smash against the camera lens, plunging my view into chaotic flashes of darkness and blurry stone walls. Brenda, recognizing the immediate threat of Thomas discovering the phone, launched into a theatrical display of physical deflection. She stepped squarely in front of the towering billionaire, blocking his line of sight to her husband. "Oh, Thomas," she gasped loudly, clapping her hands together with forced enthusiasm. "This is all terribly stressful for you and poor Nia. We are all so embarrassed by this minor administrative hiccup. You two should go back upstairs to the penthouse suite and try to get some rest before the big day tomorrow. Richard and Connor have everything under control down here." Thomas did not budge. He looked down at my mother as if she were a minor inconvenience blocking his path. "I do not sleep when police officers are attempting to arrest my future son-in-law in the courtyard of a luxury venue I paid for Brenda," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "I want to see the official documentation they are holding right now. I want to see exactly what kind of banking error requires handcuffs." Connor aggressively stepped sideways, physically blocking Thomas from approaching the officers. "Please, Thomas," Connor insisted, his voice dripping with fake humility. "I would never ask you to involve yourself in my firm internal auditing issues. It is highly confidential corporate data. My sister Gwen is currently on the phone with our compliance department in Manhattan as we speak. We are clearing the security protocols right now. Go comfort Nia. I will be upstairs in 15 minutes to explain everything." The Italian officers were entirely done with the side conversations. The senior officer stepped forward, shoving Connor back. "No more talking," the officer barked, holding up the stack of printed transaction records. "You show real money now or you go to station. We do not wait for your corporate people. This is criminal fraud." My parents panicked. The delicate balancing act was collapsing in real time. Richard, still failing to hang up the phone due to his sweating hands, shoved the device deep into his suit jacket pocket to muffle the audio. My screen went completely black, but the microphone was still active. I could hear the muffled rustling of the fabric as my father stepped closer to the police officers, speaking in a frantic whisper. He was begging the authorities to give them 10 more minutes, desperately promising that they had a wealthy benefactor standing right behind them who could clear the massive debt if they could just get him entirely alone. They were physically blocking the camera and muffling the speaker to ensure I could not interrupt their secondary con. Sitting in my quiet apartment, I pulled my hand away from the microphone button. Unmuting my audio would be useless now. Even if I screamed the truth, my voice would be nothing but a muffled buzzing sound trapped inside his pocket. They had effectively silenced me on the video call, but they were fighting an outdated war. They thought hiding a phone was enough to stop a senior forensic accountant. I did not need to shout to destroy their web of lies. I had a different method prepared to deliver the truth directly to the man who needed it most. I turned my chair completely away from the phone, ignoring the muffled, frantic rustling noises coming from my father's suit pocket. I dragged the compiled dossier of Connor's financial crimes into a secure, encrypted folder on my desktop. As a senior forensic accountant, I had access to premium corporate intelligence databases. I did not need to ask anyone for Thomas Carter's contact information. I simply opened my firm's global directory portal, typed in his full name, and the name of his automotive empire, and hit enter. Within 5 seconds, the system generated his executive profile, complete with his direct public business email address and his personal cellular number. I copied the email address into the recipient line of a new highly secure message, but sending it solely to Thomas was not enough. My father was currently standing in the Italian courtyard, desperately trying to sweet-talk the local police and the hotel manager into giving them more time. If Thomas confronted them privately, my parents would undoubtedly try to spin another massive web of lies to explain away the documents. I needed the authorities and the venue staff to see the exact same evidence simultaneously. It had to be a coordinated strike. I quickly opened a new browser tab, located the official website for the luxury villa in Lake Como, and found the direct email address for the executive concierge desk. I added the hotel manager to the carbon copy line of the email. I kept the subject line incredibly brief and entirely professional. I typed urgent financial fraud documentation regarding Connor and flagged the message with maximum priority. In the body of the email, I did not waste time with emotional apologies or family drama. I wrote with the cold clinical precision of a lead investigator presenting a case to a federal judge. I stated my full legal name, my corporate title, and my relation to the man currently being detained in their lobby. I explicitly clarified that I had absolutely no involvement with the fraudulent loan, that my identity had been stolen, and that my brother had zero affiliation with my accounting firm. I instructed them to review the attached PDF dossier containing the IP logs, the forged property deed, and Connor's actual credit history. While the attachments were uploading to the secure server, I glanced back at the FaceTime window on my second monitor. The screen was still completely pitch black, trapped deep inside my father's jacket. However, the microphone was picking up the chaotic audio with crystal clarity. I could hear the muffled, frantic voice of my father begging the Italian officers to just wait for his phantom banking liaison to call back. I could hear Connor deploying his smoothest, most charismatic tone, desperately assuring Thomas that the entire situation was nothing but an unfortunate misunderstanding caused by my incompetence. And I could hear my mother loudly offering to order more champagne for Nia, frantically trying to distract the bride from the reality of her collapsing wedding. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime. They were expending massive amounts of energy to physically block a camera lens and muffle a phone speaker, genuinely believing they had successfully neutralized me. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully trapped me in New York, completely powerless to stop their glamorous Italian charade. The sheer irony of their ignorance was almost poetic. They were fighting a desperate analog war against a woman who held the digital keys to their total destruction. The upload progress bar hit 100%. The attachment was fully secured. I took one final deep breath, letting the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat ground me. I was about to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. Pressing the send button meant officially severing my ties with the people who had raised me. It meant actively participating in the arrest of my own flesh and blood. But as I listened to them casually throw my name and my hard-earned career into the mud just to protect a criminal, any lingering hesitation completely vanished. They had already severed the ties. I was simply making it official. I moved my cursor over the send button and firmly clicked my mouse. My highly secure corporate email client immediately generated a clear delivery tracking notification. I quietly watched the tiny digital icon as my encrypted message instantly bounced from my local server in Manhattan, traveled through the transatlantic fiber optic cables, resting at the bottom of the ocean, and landed directly in the inbox of a billionaire standing thousands of miles away. The digital bomb had been dropped. Now all I had to do was simply sit back in the quiet comfort of my apartment and wait for the devastating explosion to happen. As I sat watching the delivery confirmation on my screen, a sudden burst of light flooded the FaceTime window. My father had failed to properly lock his screen, and the phone was aggressively yanked from his pocket. The camera wildly swung upward, refocusing to reveal Nia's furious face. She had clearly grown tired of the men whispering with the police and decided to take matters into her own hands. She held the phone high, looking down at the camera lens with absolute disdain. She was completely unaware that the digital guillotine was already dropping toward her perfect wedding. "Are you still there, Gwen?" Nia demanded, her voice cutting sharply through the ambient noise of the Italian courtyard. "I want to make something perfectly clear to you before we hang up and permanently block your number. You will never actually understand what it means to be part of high society. You will never comprehend the concept of a true partnership between equals. You sit in your lonely apartment crunching numbers for other people while Connor and I are out here building a legacy. You are trying to drag him down to your pathetic level because you are terrified of being left behind." I did not interrupt her. I simply let her speak, observing her arrogant delusion with cold fascination. She was so convinced of her superiority that she was practically reading from his exact psychological script without knowing it. "You think freezing his corporate accounts is going to stop this wedding?" Nia continued, letting out a harsh laugh. "You are completely delusional. We do not need your routing errors fixed tonight. We are legally bound in ways you could never possibly dismantle. Connor and I already signed an ironclad prenuptial agreement last month. We signed a massive legal contract drafted and reviewed by the absolute top family lawyers residing in Atlanta." Her words hit me like a physical shockwave. A prenuptial agreement. My mind started racing through the severe legal implications. "That is right," Nia sneered, misinterpreting my stunned silence as defeat. "Connor insisted on it. He wanted to protect his massive corporate assets and his real estate portfolio from my family's estate. He is a self-made millionaire, Gwen. He brought his own wealth to the table. He laid out his entire financial portfolio for my father's legal team, every single investment account, every corporate holding, and every property deed. He proved exactly how successful he is. So your petty attempt to make him look broke in front of the hotel manager is entirely pathetic." The sheer magnitude of my brother's fraud suddenly expanded from a simple stolen credit line into a massive legal catastrophe. To sign a valid prenuptial agreement, both parties are legally required to submit sworn financial disclosure documents. It is a strict mandate under penalty of perjury. Connor had not just lied to a woman over dinner. He had submitted fabricated financial documents and fake corporate tax returns to elite corporate attorneys. He had sworn under oath that he owned assets that actually belonged to me. He had committed severe perjury and criminal fraud against the legal system. He had created an irreversible disaster. "Nia," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Did he submit the New Jersey house in his asset disclosure for the prenuptial agreement?" "Of course he did," Nia bragged, completely oblivious to the legal trap. "He submitted the deed to the New Jersey Colonial, the Manhattan office lease, and the corporate investment portfolios. He laid it all out. He is fully protected from any financial liability. Our marriage is built on complete financial transparency. You are the only one trying to hide things. You are completely jealous of his incredible financial success." I stared at her, genuinely horrified by the radioactive legal disaster my brother had constructed. He had actively bound his fraudulent claims into a binding contract with a billionaire's legal team. When Thomas Carter's lawyers discovered that Connor had submitted forged documents and committed perjury during the prenuptial negotiations, they were going to absolutely destroy him. They were going to dismantle his entire life, and they would likely drag my parents down with him for corroborating his lies. There was absolutely no escaping this legal nightmare now. "You really think he protected his assets from you?" I asked, unable to keep the grim satisfaction out of my voice. "Nia, you need to turn around right now. Check your father." Nia frowned, clearly confused by my sudden shift in tone. "What are you talking about?" she snapped, her arrogant facade cracking slightly. "Just turn around and look at your father," I repeated calmly. "The financial transparency you are so incredibly proud of is about to be delivered right to him on a silver platter, for everyone to finally see perfectly." Nia stared at the phone screen, her eyebrows pulling together in a tight knot of confusion and sudden apprehension. She did not understand what I meant by financial transparency being delivered, but my absolute certainty clearly rattled her. She slowly lowered the phone, the camera panning across the villa courtyard until it captured her father. Thomas was standing exactly where he had been, but he was no longer looking at my parents. He was staring down at his glowing iPad, which a hotel concierge had just rushed out to hand him. The notification bell had chimed. But before Thomas could even open the encrypted email I had just sent, the fragile standoff in the courtyard completely collapsed. The senior Italian police officer had finally reached the absolute limit of his patience. He had watched my father fumble with a hidden phone, he had listened to Connor spin endless circles of corporate jargon, and he had waited long enough for the supposed banking glitch to miraculously resolve itself. The grace period was officially over. The officer aggressively stepped forward, waving his hand in a sharp, dismissive motion that cut through the heavy, humid air. He barked a series of rapid, authoritative commands in Italian to his partner. The second officer unclipped a heavy metal ring of keys from his belt and grabbed Connor by the bicep, forcefully yanking him away from the protective shadow of my father. "Wait!" My father shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic as he lunged forward. "Just give us 5 more minutes. We have the money. My daughter is fixing the routing error right now." The senior officer shoved my father back with a firm hand against his chest, completely unfazed by the desperate pleading. "No more minutes," the officer stated, his thick accent, leaving no room for negotiation or misunderstanding. "The bank says the money is stolen. We have the official report from the hotel manager. He goes to jail now." In his frantic attempt to physically intervene, my father accidentally pulled his phone completely out of his suit jacket pocket. The device slipped from his sweaty grip and clattered loudly onto the stone patio. It landed perfectly propped up against the base of a heavy marble planter, the camera lens pointing directly at the center of the courtyard. The chaotic scene was now perfectly framed on my dual monitors in New York. I had a front row seat to the exact moment my brother's carefully constructed empire of lies completely shattered. Connor fought wildly against the officers, his expensive custom tuxedo tearing at the shoulder seam as he desperately tried to break free. The charming, sophisticated billionaire persona he had maintained for months vanished in a single instant. He was no longer the confident executive officer closing international deals. He was a terrified, cornered fraudster, realizing he was about to spend the night in a foreign prison cell. His face flushed a dark, angry crimson, and spit flew from his lips as he screamed. He violently twisted his neck, his wild eyes frantically scanning the patio until they locked onto the glowing screen of the dropped phone. He knew I was watching. He knew I held the ultimate power to stop the officers from dragging him toward the transport van. "Gwen," he roared, his voice tearing through the courtyard with unhinged ferocity. "Press the button. Authorize the funds right now. If you let them put me in that van, I swear to God, I will dedicate the rest of my life to completely ruining yours. I will destroy your career. I will burn your house to the ground. I will make sure you lose everything you have ever worked for. You press that button or you are dead to me." My mother shrieked, covering her face with her hands as the steel handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists. Nia stood completely frozen, her mouth slightly open, watching the man she thought was a powerful corporate titan throw a desperate, violent temper tantrum on the ground like a spoiled child. I sat in my quiet office thousands of miles away, listening to his vicious threats echo through the speakers. I looked at his furious face on my screen. He honestly believed that fear would still work on me. He thought that threatening to destroy my life would finally force me to surrender and fund his criminal lifestyle one last time. But he had absolutely no power left. He was a broke, unemployed felon screaming at a camera while the real power was currently sitting in the email inbox of the billionaire standing right behind him. I did not yell back. I did not justify my actions or beg for apology. I simply leaned back in my desk chair, looked directly into my webcam, and smiled. I reached forward and finally pressed the small microphone icon on my screen, unmuting my audio. The sudden transmission of my quiet office background noise cut through the chaotic screaming in the Italian courtyard. My father froze, staring down at the phone leaning against the marble planter. Connor stopped thrashing against the grip of the Italian police officers waiting for me to finally surrender. He expected me to be crying. He expected me to be terrified by his threats of destroying my career and burning my life to the ground. Instead, my calm, steady voice echoed from the phone speaker, amplifying across the silent patio. "I am not going to press any buttons, Connor," I said, my tone perfectly conversational and devoid of any emotional distress. "And you are not going to destroy my career because you are never going to work in the corporate industry again. I did not just sit here quietly listening to your pathetic threats for the last 20 minutes. I used that time productively. While you were busy threatening me and lying to your future father-in-law about routing errors, I initiated a secondary protocol on my communication software. I merged this FaceTime call with another highly secure line. The absolute silence in the courtyard deepened. My mother slowly lowered her hands from her face, her eyes wide with sudden apprehension. Nia took a step back, her bridal robe looking out of place in what was rapidly becoming a crime scene. Connor swallowed hard, the confident facade completely crumbling as the reality of my words began to sink in. Merged the call with who my father demanded, his voice trembling slightly as he instinctively took a step toward the dropped phone. "Who else is on this line right now, Gwen?" I did not answer him directly. Instead, I yielded the floor to the silent listener who had been meticulously documenting every single word spoken over the last 15 minutes. "Go ahead, Agent Miller," I said clearly into my microphone. "The floor is entirely yours." A new voice suddenly projected from the phone speaker, entirely distinct from my own. It was a deep, authoritative voice, carrying the unmistakable cadence of seasoned law enforcement. "Good evening," the voice announced instantly, commanding the attention of every single person standing in the courtyard. "My name is Special Agent David Miller. I am calling from the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation New York Field Office. I have been officially monitoring this merged line for approximately 15 minutes at the direct request of the primary victim, Miss Gwen." My father physically recoiled as if the phone had just burst into flames. Brenda let out a strangled gasp, her knees buckling beneath her weight. Connor turned the color of freshly poured concrete. The Italian police officers, recognizing the authoritative tone and the mention of the Federal Bureau, immediately tightened their grip on his arms, looking intently at the glowing screen on the ground. Agent Miller did not pause to let them recover from the shock. He delivered his statement with the cold, clinical precision of a federal prosecutor laying out a rock-solid legal indictment. Over the course of this monitored call, Agent Miller continued, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the luxury villa. "I have recorded the suspect Connor actively threatening the victim in an attempt to extort the authorization of fraudulent funds. I have also recorded multiple individuals, presumably the parents of the suspect, actively attempting to coerce the victim into validating a forged document and covering up a federal crime involving interstate wire fraud and aggravated identity theft." The air in the courtyard was completely sucked out. This was no longer a messy family argument about wedding expenses. This was no longer a desperate attempt to maintain a fake billionaire persona in front of a wealthy bride. It was a live federal investigation, and my parents had just been officially recorded, acting as active co-conspirators. They had openly admitted to knowing about the fraudulent nature of the loan and had aggressively pressured me to lie to a bank to protect the main perpetrator. "Mr. Connor," Agent Miller stated, his tone completely devoid of any sympathy, "you are currently detained by international authorities, but you should be fully aware that a federal warrant for your arrest is currently being drafted in the Southern District of New York. The financial transfers you attempted to execute constitute severe federal offenses. Extorting a witness across international lines carries additional mandatory prison sentencing." Connor opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no sound came out. The charismatic entrepreneur who had confidently spun lies just moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified criminal staring directly into the abyss of a lengthy federal prison sentence. The senior Italian officer standing over the dropped phone slowly lowered his stack of printed transaction records. He had spent years dealing with wealthy tourists, trying to talk their way out of local trouble, but the sudden presence of an American federal agent entirely shifted the atmosphere in the courtyard. The officer crouched down, bringing his face closer to the phone, leaning against the marble planter. "Officer, this is Special Agent Miller," the voice projected clearly from the device. "I understand you have the suspect currently detained. Can you please confirm your jurisdiction and agency?" The Italian officer cleared his throat, his posture stiffening even while crouching. "I am Captain Rossi, with the Carabinieri of the Lombardy region," he replied in his thick accent. "We hold this man for grand theft and defrauding local hospitality businesses. He claims his corporate accounts are locked due to an administrative routing error by his sister." Agent Miller did not hesitate. "Captain Rossi, I am officially confirming that there is no corporate account and there is no routing error. The suspect Connor is not an executive officer of any financial firm. He illegally obtained his sister's social security number and forged her signature to secure a fraudulent, unsecured loan of $150,000. The credit cards he used to pay your local vendors are directly tied to that stolen identity. The funds were automatically frozen by American banking security protocols because they are the proceeds of a severe federal crime. He is actively attempting to flee international debts using a fabricated identity." The absolute finality in Agent Miller's voice echoed off the ancient stone walls of the villa. There was no room for interpretation, no loophole for my father to exploit, and no charming lie that could possibly save my brother now. The official confirmation from the Federal Bureau of Investigation hung heavily in the humid night air, completely obliterating the billionaire CEO illusion Connor had spent months carefully constructing. Captain Rossi nodded slowly. He stood up, his expression hardening as he looked down at my brother. The last shred of professional courtesy he had extended to a supposedly wealthy American tourist vanished entirely. He motioned to his partner, who immediately tightened the plastic cuffs around Connor's wrists, making him wince in sharp pain. Connor's confident facade completely shattered. The arrogant smirk he had worn since arriving in Italy dissolved into an expression of absolute, unadulterated terror. He began to hyperventilate. His chest heaved erratically beneath his ruined custom tuxedo shirt. He gasped for air, his eyes darting frantically around the courtyard like a trapped animal searching for an impossible escape route. He looked at Nia, begging silently for her family's wealth to shield him, but she took another horrified step backward. He looked at my father, the man who had enabled and protected him his entire life, but Richard was completely paralyzed, staring blankly at the stone patio. "I cannot breathe," Connor wheezed, his knees buckling slightly as the officers held him upright. "I cannot go to federal prison. Mom, you have to do something. Please do something." But my mother was in no position to save anyone. The sheer magnitude of the situation finally penetrated her deep layers of delusion. She realized that her golden child was not just facing a minor embarrassment. He was facing years in a federal penitentiary, and she had just been recorded by an FBI agent actively conspiring to help him commit financial extortion. The blood drained completely from Brenda's face, leaving her skin a ghastly shade of gray. She let out a weak, high-pitched gasp, clutching her chest with both trembling hands. Her knees gave out completely. She collapsed heavily into a wrought iron patio chair, her head falling back as she hovered on the very edge of fainting. She stared up at the dark Italian sky, taking short, shallow breaths, completely unable to process the total destruction of her perfect family image. My father rushed to her side, his own hands shaking violently as he tried to steady her. He looked terrified. The aggressive, commanding patriarch who had just threatened to disown me and destroy my reputation was entirely gone. He was finally realizing that the federal government does not care about neighborhood social status or family loyalty. He had actively participated in a recorded extortion attempt across international lines, and he knew Agent Miller was building a case against him as well. I watched them completely unravel on my monitor. For 34 years, they had demanded that I sacrifice my own well-being to protect Connor from the consequences of his actions. They had expected me to quietly absorb the financial and emotional damage he constantly inflicted. But tonight they were finally forced to face the brutal, unavoidable reality. As my mother gasped in her patio chair and my father stood frozen, a sharp chime cut through the silence. The notification bell echoed loudly from the sleek silver iPad resting firmly in Thomas Carter's hands. The hotel concierge had rushed it out to him just moments before the FBI bombshell dropped. Thomas did not look up. He simply raised the tablet, adjusted the gold-rimmed reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, and tapped the glowing screen. He had opened my email. I sat perfectly still in Manhattan, watching the automotive tycoon process the digital execution of my brother. Thomas swiped his finger across the glass opening the attached PDF dossier I compiled. The courtyard remained agonizingly quiet save for my mother's ragged breathing. Thomas spent a full 60 seconds reading in absolute silence. You could physically see his formidable intellect absorbing the hard data, verifying the official county seals, and connecting the devastating dots. His expression did not twist into rage. Instead, it hardened into a mask of pure, terrifying clarity. He was a man who built a billion-dollar empire by reading complex contracts, and he immediately recognized a bulletproof audit when he saw one. Naya took a hesitant step toward him, her hands trembling as she clutched the lapels of her bridal robe. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What does it say? Who is emailing you right now?" Thomas slowly lowered his reading glasses, letting them hang from the gold chain around his neck. He looked directly at Connor, who was now weeping openly while being restrained by the carabinieri. "The email is from Gwen Thomas," announced his deep voice, carrying a lethal, booming resonance that demanded total submission from everyone present. "It is a comprehensive forensic audit of your fiancé's financial portfolio. And it appears the man you are about to marry is not a self-made corporate titan. He is an unemployed, destitute criminal who has been living entirely off the charity and stolen credit of the sister he just called mentally unstable." Nia gasped, shaking her head in frantic denial. "No, that is impossible," she stammered, pointing a manicured finger at Connor. "He showed you the corporate lease. He showed us the tax returns. He showed us amateur forgeries." Thomas corrected her, sharply raising the iPad so she could see the glowing screen. "According to these official federal background checks and verified tax records, Connor has not held a legitimate job in over 36 months. He does not own a forensic accounting firm. He does not sit on a corporate board. His actual credit score is an abysmal 420. He is completely broke." Connor squeezed his eyes shut, turning his face away from the blinding light of the truth. But Thomas was just getting started. He scrolled to the next page of the dossier, determined to expose every single lie. 48 hours ago, while you two were enjoying a luxury hotel suite in Milan, Connor illegally obtained his sister's social security number. Thomas read aloud, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. He submitted a fraudulent application for an unsecured personal loan of $150,000. The IP address on the submitted application perfectly matches the wireless network of the Milan hotel. He used that stolen money to fund this entire wedding. The checks bounced because his sister's automated fraud protection flagged the federal crime. My father tried to speak, raising a weak hand. "Thomas, please," he croaked. "We can explain everything. It was just a desperate mistake." Thomas turned his piercing gaze toward my father, shutting him down instantly. "Do not insult my intelligence, Richard," he snapped. "You are just as complicit, and you are also completely homeless, because the final document in this file is a certified property deed." Thomas swiped to the last page. To secure this fraudulent loan, your son submitted a forged power of attorney to leverage a second mortgage on your colonial house in New Jersey. But he could not legally do that because you do not own that house. Gwen bought it out of foreclosure 5 years ago. Your son just tried to put a lien on property that legally belongs to the woman you just threatened to disown. The magnitude of the betrayal finally hit Naya with full force. Her mouth fell open in sheer horror. Her jaw literally dropped as she stared at the sniveling, handcuffed man she had almost pledged her life to. The billionaire illusion was completely dead, replaced by the ugly, undeniable reality of a pathological con artist who had risked his own parents' shelter for a taste of luxury. He had manipulated her heart and her family's trust to orchestrate the most elaborate financial scam of his pathetic life. The absolute silence that followed Thomas Carter's declaration was shattered by the sound of a sharp, stinging slap. Nia stepped forward, her hand moving so fast it was a blur on my monitor, and struck Connor directly across his tear-stained cheek. The sharp crack echoed through the courtyard, making even the Italian officers flinch. Connor recoiled, his head snapping to the side, but the plastic cuffs prevented him from defending himself. "You lied to me!" Nia shrieked, her voice completely devoid of its former aristocratic elegance. "You looked me in the eyes every single day, and you lied to me. You made me introduce you to my father. You made me bring you into my home. You made me sign a prenuptial agreement to protect assets that did not even exist. You are nothing but a disgusting, broke criminal who is trying to steal my family money." Connor desperately shook his head, tears streaming down his face as he tried to salvage the unsalvageable. "Nia, please listen to me," he sobbed, his voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "I did it all for us. I wanted to give you the wedding you deserved. I was going to pay my sister back the second I started working for your father. It was an investment in our future. You have to believe me. I just wanted to be worthy of you." "Worthy of me!" Nia screamed, stepping even closer to him, her face contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. "You stole from your own sister and tried to make your parents homeless just to buy a tuxedo and a boat ride. You are not a businessman. You are a parasite. You thought my father would just hand you a vice president title while you paid off your felony debts with his money. You are completely pathetic. I would rather die than marry a fraud like you." My mother, who had been gasping in the patio chair, suddenly found a final surge of defensive adrenaline. Seeing her precious golden child being verbally annihilated by his former bride snapped her out of her stupor. She staggered to her feet, her face flushed with a desperate, irrational anger. "Do not you dare speak to my son that way!" Brenda shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Nia. "He loved you. He bent over backward to impress you and your snobby family. If you and your father were not so obsessed with wealth and status, he would not have felt the need to borrow that money in the first place. This is your fault for having such ridiculous expectations. You drove him to this." Nia slowly turned her head, her dark eyes locking onto my mother with a look of absolute lethal contempt. "My fault?" Nia repeated, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "Your unemployed son commits identity theft and federal wire fraud, and you have the audacity to blame me. You are just as delusional as he is. No wonder he turned out to be a pathological liar. He learned it from a mother who covers up his crimes and blames everyone else for his massive failures. You are a terrible mother, and your entire family is an absolute joke." My father stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "That is enough," Richard barked, trying to reclaim some semblance of patriarchal authority. "You will not insult my wife." Thomas Carter immediately stepped squarely between my father and Nia, his massive frame completely blocking Richard from advancing any further. "You do not get to give orders here, Richard," Thomas warned, his voice rumbling like an approaching thunderstorm. "Your wife just blamed my daughter for your son's felony. You have spent this entire evening lying to my face, covering for a thief, and actively conspiring against your own daughter in New York. You are a disgrace of a man. You have absolutely no authority, no moral high ground, and as of this moment, no home to return to." the screaming match erupted into total uncontrollable chaos. My mother shrieked insults at Naya, calling her a spoiled princess. Naya screamed back, calling my parents enabling criminals. Connor continued to sob hysterically, begging anyone to listen to his pathetic excuses. Richard and Thomas stood chest to chest, exchanging furious, heated threats. I sat alone in my dark apartment, watching the spectacular collapse unfold on my monitor. The phone resting against the marble planter captured every single second of their devastating downfall. They had spent their entire lives projecting a flawless image of superiority, constantly making me feel like the defective family member. Now the mask was completely ripped off, exposing the ugly, toxic reality they had fought so desperately to hide. I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. I just felt an overwhelming sense of total vindication. Thomas Carter had entertained enough of the chaotic circus. He suddenly stepped back from my father, raising his hands in a gesture of absolute dismissal. He adjusted the lapels of his tailored dinner jacket, smoothing out the invisible wrinkles caused by the proximity to my enraged, red-faced father. Enough, Thomas boomed, his voice slicing through the cacophony of shrieks and insults like a sharp blade. The courtyard instantly fell dead silent. My mother clamped her mouth shut, and Nia took a step backward to stand firmly behind her father. Thomas turned his attention entirely away from my pathetic family and looked directly at Captain Rossi, who was standing by patiently with his officers. Captain Thomas said, his tone shifting back to the calm, authoritative cadence of a corporate titan conducting business. I formally apologize for this unacceptable disturbance on behalf of my family. We have absolutely zero relation to this man or his associates. They are not our guests, and we hold no financial or legal responsibility for his fraudulent actions. Please execute your duties. Do your job and remove this criminal from our venue immediately. Captain Rossi offered a curt nod of appreciation. The Italian officer signaled his partner, and they immediately seized Connor by both of his arms. The reality of Thomas Carter's dismissal hit my brother like a physical blow. The billionaire's safety net was completely gone. Wait, Thomas, please. Connor screamed, his voice pitching upward into a terrified, animalistic wail. I can fix this. I can explain the paperwork. Just give me one more chance. But Thomas did not even grace him with a backward glance. The officers dragged Connor roughly across the cobblestone courtyard toward the waiting transport van. Connor dug the heels of his expensive leather shoes into the stone, frantically trying to resist the overwhelming physical force of the authorities. The plastic cuffs dug deeply into his wrists, but he fought like a drowning man. Mom, he shrieked, twisting his head to look back at the patio. Mom, do not let them take me. Call the embassy. Call a lawyer. Mom, help me. Brenda lunged forward, letting out a horrific, ear-piercing scream. She reached out with trembling hands, desperately trying to grab the torn fabric of his custom tuxedo. But the second Italian officer easily stepped into her path, holding up a firm hand and warning her in strict English to step back or face immediate arrest for interfering with an active police investigation. My mother collapsed back into the wrought iron chair, burying her face in her hands and sobbing uncontrollably. My father stood frozen, watching the absolute destruction of his legacy play out under the harsh glare of the red and blue strobe lights. Thomas turned to his daughter, his expression softening only slightly. Nia, he commanded gently but firmly. Go upstairs to the penthouse suite right now, gather your belongings and pack your bags. We are leaving this island tonight. The wedding is completely officially cancelled. I will have the concierge arrange for our private jet to be prepped for an immediate departure back to Atlanta. Do not leave a single item behind. Nia nodded, pulling her silk bridal robe tightly around her shivering frame. She cast one final, disgusted look at the hysterical man she had almost married, completely shedding any lingering attachment to the pathetic fraud. Yes, Daddy, she whispered quickly, turning on her heel and marching toward the grand staircase of the luxury villa without looking back. She was walking away from the wreckage of my brother's lies, returning to the impenetrable fortress of her real wealth, leaving my fake billionaire brother to face the brutal consequences of his actions entirely alone. The Italian officers finally muscled Connor to the back of the heavy transport van. They shoved him forward, forcing his head down, as they pushed him violently into the dark metal cage of the vehicle. His desperate, agonizing screams echoed from inside the metal box, begging for our mother, begging for Nia, and finally begging for me to save him. But his pleas were abruptly silenced as Captain Rossi slammed the heavy steel doors entirely shut. The metallic clang signaled the absolute end of his extravagant charade. The police officer walked around the side of the vehicle, climbed into the driver's seat, and ignited the engine. The flashing blue lights swept across the stone arches of the villa one last time as the van slowly pulled out of the grand driveway, carrying the golden child toward a cold, foreign jail cell. The courtyard descended into an eerie, suffocating silence. Thomas walked away, disappearing into the hotel lobby without another word. The remaining hotel staff quietly retreated into the shadows. My parents were left completely alone in the absolute center of the dark patio. For a long time, neither of my parents moved. They just stood there in the center of the dark patio, surrounded by the extravagant floral arrangements and imported silk drapery that Connor had tried to buy with my stolen identity. The gentle breeze coming off Lake Como rustled the leaves of the olive trees, but the luxurious atmosphere had completely vanished. It was replaced by the cold, hard reality of their absolute ruin. I watched through the dropped phone as the heavy glass doors of the hotel lobby suddenly slid open. Thomas Carter marched out, followed closely by Nia and a team of private security guards carrying their matched designer luggage. Nia had changed out of her silk bridal robe and was now wearing a stark black travel suit, looking as if she were attending a funeral instead of leaving her own wedding. She did not even glance in the direction of my parents. She walked straight past them, her chin held high, and climbed into the back of a waiting black sport utility vehicle. Thomas paused just before getting into the car. He looked at my father one last time. His expression held no anger anymore, only profound pity. "Good luck," Richard Thomas said, his voice flat and dismissive. "You are going to need it." He climbed into the vehicle, and the heavy doors slammed shut. The convoy of luxury cars pulled away from the villa, heading directly for the private aviation terminal at the airport. They were flying back to Atlanta, leaving the nightmare entirely behind them. My parents were now completely abandoned. But their nightmare was just beginning. The hotel manager stepped out onto the patio, flanked by two large security guards. He was a tall, imposing Italian man who was clearly furious about the bounced checks and the police presence ruining the reputation of his elite establishment. "Mr. and Mrs." the manager said, his English heavily accented, but perfectly clear. "The accounts are frozen. The wedding is cancelled. Your luxury suites are no longer paid for. I need you to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises immediately. You have 20 minutes before I have my security team escort you off the property." My mother let out a fresh sob, clutching her chest. "But where are we supposed to go?" she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "It is the middle of the night. We do not have a car. Our son is in jail." "That is not my problem," the manager replied, crossing his arms over his chest. "This is a private hotel, not a charity. 20 minutes. He will make sure you leave." The manager turned on his heel and walked back inside, leaving the security guards standing at the door with their arms crossed. My father stood frozen, his face pale and slick with sweat. He reached into his pockets, pulling out his wallet. His hands shook as he opened it. I knew exactly what was inside. Nothing. My parents had flown to Italy, relying entirely on the illusion of Connor's wealth. They had assumed the billionaire CEO would cover every single expense, including their flights, their meals, and their accommodations. They had maxed out their own meager credit cards just to buy their formal wear for the weekend. They were stranded in a foreign country with no hotel room, no rental car, and absolutely no money to buy a plane ticket home. Slowly, my father's eyes drifted downward. He saw his phone still resting against the marble planter. He remembered that the FaceTime call was still active. He remembered that the daughter he had just threatened to disown was still watching every single second of their humiliating downfall. He dropped to his knees on the hard cobblestone and reached for the phone. His face filled my screen. The arrogance, the condescension, the cruel ultimatums, they were all completely gone. He looked like a broken, terrified old man. "Gwen," he whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. "Gwen, are you still there? Are you still? Please tell me you are still there." "I am here, Dad," I replied, my voice calm and completely detached. "You have to help us," my mother cried out, crawling across the patio to press her face next to his against the screen. "We have absolutely nothing, Gwen. They are throwing us out onto the street. We do not have money for a hotel. We do not have money for a flight. We cannot even afford a taxi to the airport. Please, Gwen, you have to buy us plane tickets. Just get us back to New York. We will do whatever you want. We will apologize. We will go to counseling. Just do not leave us here." I stared back at their completely terrified, pathetic faces. I watched their terrified faces staring back at me through the phone screen. They were literally on their knees begging for my financial help. But their sudden willingness to apologize and attend family counseling meant absolutely nothing to me. It was not genuine remorse. It was just the panicked reaction of two selfish people who had finally run out of other people's money and could no longer manipulate their way out of a disaster. I leaned closer to the microphone. "No," I said calmly. "I am not buying you plane tickets. I am not paying for a hotel. I am not bailing you out of this nightmare." My father let out a desperate, choked gasp. "Gwen, please," he begged, his hands trembling violently as he clutched the phone. "You cannot just abandon us here in a foreign country without any resources. We are your parents. We made a terrible mistake, but we are still your family. We will pay you back every single cent if you just help us get home safely tonight." I shook my head, feeling absolutely no sympathy for the man who had threatened to completely destroy my personal reputation and professional career just 20 minutes ago. "You did not make a simple mistake, Dad," I corrected him, my voice echoing sharply across the empty Italian courtyard. "You made a conscious, calculated choice. You stood there and listened to Connor lie to Thomas Carter about owning my accounting firm. You actively covered the camera lens so I could not expose his federal crimes to the authorities. And most importantly, you knew he had forged a legal power of attorney to leverage a second mortgage on the New Jersey house to pay for this fake billionaire wedding." My mother started sobbing even louder, banging her fist against the hard cobblestone. "We did not think it would go this far," she wailed, her face completely red and streaked with mascara. "We thought he would just get the temporary loan and pay it back after the honeymoon. We did not want you to lose the house, Gwen. We thought it was just a technicality." "You are lying," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving register. "You did not care if I lost the house because you have spent the last 5 years pretending you still owned it. I saved you from severe foreclosure. I bought that property directly from the bank so you would not be thrown out onto the street. I let you live there completely rent-free. And in return, you actively helped your golden child try to steal the very roof over your heads just to protect his fragile ego and impress a wealthy family." My parents stared at me, completely silenced by the brutal, undeniable truth. "And because you chose to act as active accomplices in his real estate fraud, there are severe legal consequences for your actions tonight." I continued, refusing to break eye contact with the camera. "I am officially terminating our housing arrangement. You are no longer my tenants. I am legally evicting you from the New Jersey house." My father stared at the screen, his eyes wide with absolute sheer horror. "You cannot do that," he whispered, his voice breaking into a pathetic wheeze. "Where will we live, Gwen? We do not have any savings. We do not have anywhere else to go. You are punishing us for his crimes." "You punished yourselves," I fired back immediately. You have exactly 30 days from tomorrow morning to completely vacate the premises. My real estate lawyer will be posting the official 30-day eviction notice on the front door by noon tomorrow. If your belongings are not entirely removed from the property by the absolute deadline, I will have the county sheriff physically change the locks and throw everything you own into the street. I will not give you a single extension under any circumstances. Seeing that begging was no longer working, my mother's true toxic nature instantly resurfaced. She stopped crying and glared at the phone. "You are a cold, heartless monster," she hissed, venom dripping from every single word. "You are intentionally leaving your elderly parents stranded in Italy just to prove a point. You are going to burn in hell for treating your own blood this way." I smiled, feeling a massive heavy weight finally lift off my shoulders. "You wanted to gamble with my property to buy your son a luxury boat ride and impress a billionaire," I stated firmly. "Well, you just lost that stupid gamble entirely. You can figure out how to get back to America on your own without my credit cards. You have 30 days. I highly suggest you start packing immediately." I reached forward and permanently ended the call, leaving them in darkness. 3 weeks passed since that fateful night in Italy. The massive international scandal had completely decimated the fragile illusion my family had spent decades building. Connor did not experience a miraculous last-minute rescue. Without any massive wealth or my stolen credit to shield him, my brother was forced to navigate the incredibly slow and unforgiving Italian legal system entirely alone. He spent 21 agonizing days sitting in a cramped foreign holding cell, waiting for his diplomatic paperwork to process. Then the extradition order was finally approved by the European authorities. He was placed on a commercial flight back to the United States, surrounded by armed federal marshals. He landed at John F. Kennedy International Airport on a rainy Tuesday morning. There were no flashing cameras or adoring crowds waiting to welcome the successful chief executive officer home. Instead, Special Agent Miller and a team of federal agents were standing right at the arrival gate. The moment Connor stepped off the jet bridge, he was immediately taken into federal custody. They stripped him of his expensive tailored clothes and placed him in a standard orange jumpsuit. He was formally charged with aggravated identity theft, interstate wire fraud, and international extortion. The billionaire entrepreneur was now simply federal inmate number 7492. My parents experienced a completely different but equally devastating downfall. After I hung up the phone that night, the Italian hotel manager kept his promise. He had his private security team physically escort my parents off the luxury property, leaving them standing on the dark cobblestone street with nothing but their designer luggage. They spent their first night sleeping on hard plastic chairs in a local train station. They quickly realized that their arrogant attitudes and aggressive demands meant absolutely nothing without money to back them up. To survive, they were forced to walk into a pawn shop in Milan and sell their most prized possessions. My father had to hand over his vintage gold Rolex watch, and my mother had to part with her diamond-encrusted Cartier bracelet. They sold the luxury items for a fraction of their actual value, just to secure enough cash for 2 one-way tickets back to America. The parents who had bragged about flying on a private jet were forced to sit in cramped middle seats in the very last row of a discount economy airline right next to the lavatory. They spent 14 hours flying across the Atlantic Ocean, surrounded by crying infants and stale air, completely humiliated and utterly defeated. When they finally landed in New Jersey, they could not afford a luxury town car to pick them up. They had to take a cheap, heavily dented taxi back to the suburban neighborhood they had once ruled with their arrogant pride. They arrived at the colonial house completely exhausted, expecting to walk inside and somehow resume their normal, comfortable lives. They thought my 30-day eviction notice was just an angry threat that I would eventually forget about, but they were entirely wrong. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, my parents dragged their heavy suitcases up the long concrete driveway. They immediately noticed something was drastically different. The front lawn was covered in heavy-duty cardboard moving boxes. I had not waited for them to slowly pack their belongings at their own leisure. I had hired a professional moving company and a local legal representative to facilitate the immediate packing of the property. Dozens of perfectly sealed brown boxes were stacked neatly on the front porch. My father rushed up the porch steps and frantically jammed his brass key into the front door. It did not turn. The locks had already been completely changed by my real estate lawyer. An official bright yellow legal notice was securely taped to the front door, confirming the eviction process was actively in motion. They were officially locked out of the home they had tried to steal from me. My mother dropped her designer handbag onto the wooden porch and stared at the towering wall of cardboard boxes. The reality of their situation finally crushed the last remaining ounce of her delusion. They had absolutely no money. They had absolutely no home. Their golden child was currently sitting in a federal detention center facing a decade behind bars. And the daughter they had treated like a disposable bank account had finally cut them off completely. My father slumped against the locked door, sliding down until he was sitting on the porch staring blankly at the quiet suburban street. They had gambled everything to protect a lie, and they had lost everything in the process. There was no one left to call. There was no one left to manipulate. The devastating consequences of their own toxic actions had finally arrived. While my father remained paralyzed on the concrete porch of the house they no longer owned, my mother refused to accept total defeat. Brenda spent 34 years manipulating me with tears and weaponized guilt, genuinely believing she could do it one last time. Exactly 4 days after their utterly humiliating return from Italy, she boarded a train directly to Manhattan. She was no longer wearing her designer jewelry or expensive silk blouses. She looked completely disheveled, her hair unkempt, and her posture sagging under the immense weight of her new reality. She marched through the revolving glass doors of my corporate office building in the financial district, expecting to bypass the front desk and storm directly into my accounting department. She planned to create a massive public scene, crying hysterically in front of my colleagues until I surrendered out of sheer embarrassment. She thought public humiliation would force me to open my wallet and save them, but she severely underestimated how completely I secured my perimeter. Before she could take 10 steps across the polished marble floor toward the elevator banks, 2 broad-shouldered security guards stepped directly into her path. I explicitly anticipated her arrival. I provided the front desk with a high-resolution photograph of her face and strict instructions to deny her entry under any circumstances. Brenda began to shout, pointing a frantic finger toward the ceiling, demanding to see her daughter. The head of security immediately keyed his radio, notifying me that an unauthorized individual was causing a disturbance in the main lobby. I did not panic. I simply saved my spreadsheet, stood up from my desk, and took the elevator down to the ground floor. When the silver doors slid open, I saw her struggling against the guards, her voice echoing loudly off the high ceilings. She looked small, desperate, and entirely powerless. I walked calmly across the lobby, my heels clicking sharply against the marble, projecting an aura of absolute, untouchable authority. "Gwen!" She cried out the second she saw me, immediately launching into her rehearsed performance. She forcefully shoved past the security guards, tears rapidly welling in her eyes as she reached out to grab my arms. "Please, you have to call off the lawyers. Your father is sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a cheap motel. Connor is calling us collect from a federal prison phone, crying because he is terrified. We have absolutely nothing left. You made your point. You won. Now please just be the bigger person and help your family." I stopped exactly 3 feet away from her, keeping my hands firmly clasped at my sides, refusing to let her touch me. I did not flinch, and I did not offer a single ounce of comfort. Her tears, which used to trigger a severe panic attack in my chest, now meant absolutely nothing. I looked at her with the cold detachment of an auditor reviewing a fraudulent tax return. "I am not here to be the bigger person, Mom," I said, my voice cutting through her theatrical sobbing with surgical precision. "I am here to deliver your final paperwork." I reached into my tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, sealed manila folder. I held it out toward her. She stared at it, her hands trembling as she slowly took it from my grasp. She opened the flap, her eyes darting across the heavily redacted legal jargon on the first page. "That is a court-ordered injunction," I explained, ensuring my voice was loud enough for the security guards to witness the exchange. "It is a legally binding restraining order. You and Dad are strictly prohibited from contacting me by phone, email, or physical proximity. You are not allowed within 500 feet of my apartment, and you are permanently banned from this corporate building. If you attempt to ambush me at my workplace again, the guards have explicit permission to arrest you for criminal trespassing and harassment." Her jaw dropped, the remaining color draining rapidly from her shocked face. But the hits were still not over. "Turn to the second page," I commanded coldly. She flipped the heavy parchment, staring blankly at a bill of sale. "I officially sold the New Jersey property yesterday to a corporate real estate developer," I stated, delivering the final devastating blow to her shattered ego. "The house will be completely demolished next week to make room for a commercial parking lot. Your neighborhood kingdom is gone forever. You chose to protect a criminal, and this is the absolute final consequence of your toxic loyalty. Have a nice life now, Brenda." Without waiting for another response, I finally turned my back on her and confidently walked away into the elevator, completely severing the parasitic tie between us for good. The steel elevator doors slid shut completely, cutting off the sound of her frantic, muffled protests once and for all. As the metal car began its smooth ascent back to my floor, I felt a profound, unfamiliar sensation wash over my entire body. It was certainly not adrenaline. It was not the familiar, suffocating anxiety that usually followed any interaction with my parents. It was just pure, unadulterated silence. For 34 years, my brain had been held hostage by a constant, chaotic frequency of demands, guilt trips, and manufactured emergencies. I was conditioned to brace for the next financial disaster, the next tearful phone call, the next unhinged scheme to save my brother from his own catastrophic choices. But as I stepped back into my accounting department and sat at my desk, that frequency was permanently turned off. The parasitic tie was severed. The psychological warfare was officially over. Fast forward a few weeks, and that silence has become my new, beautiful reality. I am currently sitting in the living room of my Manhattan apartment, holding a warm ceramic mug of freshly brewed coffee. The morning sunlight is streaming through the large floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow across the hardwood floors. There are no frantic text messages blowing up my phone. There are no voicemails from blocked numbers threatening my career or demanding my savings. The absolute stillness of my home is a stark, glorious contrast to the dark cobblestone courtyard in Italy, where my family's entire empire of lies finally collapsed and burned to the ground. I take a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark roast, and I look out at the sprawling city skyline. I finally own my space, my money, and my life. The legal fallout from Connor's international crime spree moved swiftly, unhindered by my parents' desperate attempts to spin a new narrative. Without my bank accounts to fund a high-powered defense attorney, Connor was assigned a heavily overworked public defender. Faced with the overwhelming bulletproof mountain of digital evidence I handed over to Special Agent Miller, the prosecution offered absolutely no leniency. Connor accepted a harsh plea deal to avoid a lengthy, humiliating federal trial. He is currently serving a mandatory minimum sentence of 7 years in a medium-security federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania. There are no custom-tailored tuxedos or luxury boat rentals in his immediate future. He spends his days working in the prison laundry facility, earning pennies an hour, finally forced to understand the actual value of hard work. As for Richard and Brenda, their reality is equally bleak. The New Jersey house was completely leveled, replaced by a massive concrete foundation for the new commercial parking structure. Stripped of their stolen suburban kingdom and the facade of immense wealth they worshipped, they were forced to relocate to a tiny run-down one-bedroom apartment in a massive complex on the outskirts of the city. They work minimum wage retail jobs to afford their basic groceries, alienated from the elite social circles they once desperately tried to impress. They have no contact with the Carter family, no contact with their golden child, and absolutely no contact with me. They gambled their entire livelihood on a sociopathic liar, and the house always wins. Sitting here now, I feel absolutely no remorse. Society heavily conditions us to believe that blood is thicker than water, that we must endlessly forgive and unconditionally support the people who share our genetics, regardless of how deeply they abuse our trust. We are taught to be the bigger person, to absorb the financial and emotional blows to keep the peace. But I finally realized that keeping the peace for them meant living in a constant state of war with myself. They did not want a daughter. They wanted a compliant, silent ATM machine to fund their delusions. I did not destroy the family. I just stopped funding the illusion of one. The moment I stopped paying the admission fee, the entire theater production immediately shut down. I chose my own financial survival, my own mental health, and my own hard-earned career over their toxic, parasitic loyalty. I chose the cold, hard truth over a comfortable, expensive lie. And it was the absolute best decision I have ever made in my entire life. Please share your own personal thoughts below with me. I read every single story, and I know I am not the only person who has survived this kind of nightmare. It is time we stop feeling guilty for protecting ourselves. Have you ever had to choose between your own financial survival and family loyalty? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and remember, DNA doesn't give anyone a free pass to your bank account.